like obviously your wife is Venezuelan, but you sound very Colombian to me. I mean, I'm not an expert on the matter, but you sound way more Colombian than Venezuelan.
I do. I think I also will get some grief from my wife and her family on that because, but obviously when we were long distance, right? My Spanish had more of a Venezuelan, twang to it because my main references were, Venezuelans, right? But then when I moved to Colombia, I would speak obviously with my wife and a lot of her friends or family, only, who were Venezuelan, but my day-to-day working was with Colombians, right? So just by association, I do have more of a Colombian accent. There are certain things I'll say more Venezuelan, but I think overall my accent is closer to Colombia than it is to Venezuela.
Do you think that some people are better at imitating accents than others?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's some people who just have a gift. It's amazing. I follow a lot of people who speak different languages. I think you are a prime example. Your ability to fully adapt to a language is incredible. And there's some people who just have that gift. I also know, for example, I know some other Americans in Colombia, a guy I met and would play some sports with. He's been there for 20 years, speaks perfect Spanish grammatically, but has a very gringo accent. And he's just come to peace with it. He's been like, you know what? Like, I've tried to get it. My tongue just doesn't work that way, right? He learned it later on in life, and it's fine. As long as someone understands you and you can you can get your point across, it's fine. But there are definitely some people who have a gift for, imitating the accent and be able to fully speak like a local.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, grammatically speaking, I do think that anybody has the ability to learn another language and to be very fluent in the language and understand the grammar and how it works and everything. The accent, you do see a bit of a divide between people where you meet somebody and you're like, you speak very well, but that accent is so far off from how the natives sound, versus people like yourself who it's like, wow, I feel like I'm listening to a Colombian. And so, like, what do you credit that to? Like, how do you think you were able to develop that Colombian accent so well?
Yeah, I think part of it is that I've always liked accents in general. Like, so for example, DC does not have a particularly strong accent, right? If you meet someone from DC, you're not going to be able to immediately pinpoint they're from DC. It's not like a Boston accent. It's not, a New York accent. It's not, a California accent or a Southern accent. It's pretty neutral. And so because of that, and it's also because it's a very international and cosmopolitan city, I would see a lot of people with different accents. And when I went up to school, I get a whole, New England accent. And I love just imitating my friends and imitating people I met and making fun of them a little bit, And so I love trying to do that. I don't know if it's as good at it in English, but, I would try to do it. And so learning Spanish is the same way. It's like, all right, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to try and sound as credible as possible. So I tried to imitate the accents, right? So first when I went to Spain, I tried to speak more Spanish, right? Then when I was in Panama, I tried to speak more Panamanian. Around my wife's family, I'll try to speak a little bit more Venezuelan. And so I think I credit it a lot to, one, trying to actually listen to what makes, the accent different. Two, trying to immerse yourself as much as possible, right? So, living in Medellin, talking with my coworkers are all paisas, right? Consuming paisa literature, and literature, I guess, doesn't really help the accent, but, movies, TV shows, things like that. And then lastly, like, honestly, it's kind of funny. If you make fun of an accent, like, burlándose, oftentimes it sticks, right? So if you over exaggerate at first, like, oftentimes it'll come out as actually like a pretty good accent.
Yeah, because you're kind of accentuating the distinct features of the accent. You're noticing the differences. You said you're interested in accents and imitating that and kind of getting into the phonology of a language or a dialect. How much of it is linguistic and how much of it is trying to assimilate into the group that you're with?
That's a really good question. I think for me, it's more the assimilation. I think that's kind of what did it for me. I haven't formally studied linguistics, right? Or, phonology. I couldn't tell you, the tongue shape or, the vocal sound. I couldn't do that, right? I think it's fascinating. I love reading tidbits on how different languages evolved. But for me, it's more like, all right, if I'm working in Medellin, if all my coworkers, the team that's working for me, they're all paisa, well, I want to speak like them. I want to have that credibility, right? I don't want to be the foreigner coming in and trying to shake things up, right? I think I'm coming into their culture, into their company. I'm the one who needs to adapt, right? So part of that is not just speaking the language, but trying to actually sound, like I belong. So I think that assimilation for me was the biggest factor, or the biggest motivating factor.
I mean, that's a fantastic motivation, and I can relate to that so much. Like just wanting my interaction with the people I'm with to be as seamless as possible. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to be, like different. I think that for us, that might seem obvious. Hey, I'm working with a bunch of Paisa people. I should learn how to speak like a Paisa, right? I interact with a lot of Filipinos. I want to speak Tagalog like a Filipino. I think the truth is we're probably in a minority of people that are really committed to doing things like that. I think that there's a subset of society that is so interested in like immersing themselves in a different culture and wearing different hats depending on the groups that they're with. And where does that come from? Like how does someone develop that way of thinking?
That's a really, really good question. I don't know. I think it might be, a personality thing. I've always tried to be more of a people pleaser. I'm not particularly confrontational. If there's a fight going on, I'm usually the person who tries to go in the middle and break it up, as opposed to the one who comes in throwing haymakers, right? And so I think part of that is, all right, you want to appease to a lot of different people. You want to be, the best way to diffuse a situation is make everyone feel welcome. And I think I got a lot of that philosophy, when I was coaching, when I was teaching, trying to make, my students or everyone else feel included. And so I think that became a logical extension when I was trying to learn Spanish, right? It's, all right, I like it when people include me, right? So if I'm going to be in this language, I want to make them feel included. And how do I make them feel included? Me being a foreigner, I adapt to them, right? I do think it's a tricky thing, though, because you talk a lot about identity. So, for example, my wife and a lot of Venezuelans, they're never going to lose their Venezuelan accent, right? They could be living in Mexico for 30 years. They're going to still sound Venezuelan. And that's fine, right? It's a thing to hold on to their identity, right? But, for you and me, if I don't have a Spanish identity. I'm making this up as I go, basically. Okay, I'm speaking a different language. I'm going to adapt to what's around me, right? But I do think, for example, if I move to England, I'm still going to sound American. I'm not going to try and adopt a British accent, right? Because my English identity is American, right? So I don't think I have a concise answer to your question, like where it comes from. But I do think it has a lot to do with, how you value identity and how you value yourself in a social setting.